Good morning, PT on Ice. It's a little early this morning, 8 a.m. East Coast time. A little earlier than my usual spot at 8:30, so I'm not sure if anyone's going to jump on, but I had a little bit of a couple of plans that I couldn't alter this morning, so I'm going to get right into it this morning. So, welcome to the early show. Thanks for being on with me. So today we're going to talk a little bit about EO 989, and you know, that to me is a really cool thing, and it's no more pertinent or it's no less pertinent today than it was when it was first declared. So let me start with a little bit of a history, from the very beginning. As you know, I teach the population health course at ICE, and I'm excited about our next cohort, which starts up in the fall. And the summertime has given me a little bit of time to kind of go back and look at some of the information that's out there and some of the conversations that are happening. And of course, I also am running the Summer of Move for those of you who are playing along, as I call myself the Chief Executive Ox over there at freetheoak.com. And what we are doing is really looking at activity and movement. And so those two worlds have kind of collided. And I want to just kind of bring that today to the episode, right? So the two worlds are this. The Summer of Move, the concept of that is really about getting people active and doing things that are fun and really exploring movement. On the flip side, the population health course and the applied prevention health promotion side, that's really about teaching clinicians about how to understand that world. Because it's a very different world than what happens in the clinic, right? So in the clinic, we're trained to do that stuff. We understand how to see someone, how to evaluate a problem, usually a movement-related or musculoskeletal, deal with it, and move on. And of course, we can always brush up those skills, but we've got the basic reasoning in place. We've got a thinking methodology. On the other side, we really don't. We really don't have a thinking methodology. Thinking about groups and populations and how they move and how they interact and how do they choose their culture, or do they choose their culture? Is there any choice involved at all? And kind of how that all comes together into a pattern, a habit, such as things like physical activity, physical movement. And so this has been a problem for a long time. And if you go back and you look, you can find that it's been a problem for at least 110 years. And why do I know that? I know that because that's what EO 989 is. If you do your homework, you do your research, and you look into it, Executive Order 989 was done by Theodore Roosevelt, who basically was starting to get concerned. He was a sort of an enthusiast related to fitness and health, and very much like being a vigorous athlete of a soldier. And so he issued this idea that, listen, our Marines need to be able to walk 50 miles over the course of 3 days in less than 20 hours. So that was EO 989, and you can find that, right? So he makes this executive order, and he says, listen, our Marines have to be able to do this, or else they're not really fit for the job, and we have to concern ourselves, with war. And okay, so that happens. Uh-oh. Sorry about that. Hopefully I'm right side up. I don't know. It looks right side up to me. A little phone malfunction. Anyway, so EO 989 is Theodore Roosevelt saying, our Marines need to be able to walk 50 miles. So fast forward that, many years later, 1963, or actually let's go only in 1960, and John F. Kennedy, who at the time is the president-elect, he writes an article in Sports Illustrated, right? And you can find this. It's in the archive. Sports Illustrated, President-elect John F. Kennedy writes this article and is concerned about Americans and about our fitness levels, right? So the article is called "The Soft American," which, as we know, as much as John F. Kennedy is beloved, I would tell you that I think that article would get a lot of backlash if somebody titled an article that today, just because in many ways we are softer, and so we tend to take a little more offense to that. And so he writes this article called "The Soft American." And he's notorious for being, kind of fit and healthy, or at least looking fit and healthy. And that was a value in their family. And so he writes this article and kind of details it all. And one of the things that he says, which I think is kind of a cool quote, is that, he's particularly concerned with the fact that on the strength tests, 1 out of, or 35% of Americans failed at least one of the strength tests. And then our counterparts in Europe at the time had only a failure rate of 1.1% had a failure. And that concerns him as the president-elect. So fast forward another couple of years, 1963, same person, John F. Kennedy, he goes back and reiterates and says, hey, every Marine should be able to walk the 50 miles that Theodore Roosevelt said in EO 989, and you should be able to do it in 1 day, 20 hours or less. Okay, so he kind of launches that challenge. Now, this is where the story gets really, really interesting. So you have people who are kind of like leaders. They make statements, they see problems, they identify the problem, and then they're willing to say, hey, we've got to do something about it. To me, that's leadership. It's kind of seeing a problem, identifying it, and trying to find a way to get after it, build a plan. And then you have people who are just doers, right? And in this story, the doer was his brother, Bobby Kennedy. So the way the story goes, Bobby Kennedy hears this, JFK says, hey, every Marine should be able to walk 50 miles in 20 hours. Bobby Kennedy tells his staff, guess what? Tomorrow morning we're walking 50 miles. Now, mind you, this is in February in Washington, D.C. So there's snow on the ground, there's ice on the ground. I mean, this is not a friendly little jaunt in the countryside. This is a guy who says to his staff with no preparation, we're going to wake up tomorrow and we're going to walk 50 miles. And sure enough, at 5 a.m., he and a couple of his close staff get out and set out to walk 50 miles with his dog. The beauty of it is they make it about 30 miles, so says the story. And you can find this story. NPR recently did a, maybe a couple of years ago, 5 years ago, did a sort of 50-year anniversary story on this. And the way they say it is that Bobby Kennedy shows up in a pair of loafers, and he makes it about 30 miles, and then all of a sudden reporters hear about it, and they start showing up and taking pictures. And instead of bailing on it, the rest of his staff, I think maybe 2 stuck on, he decides, puts his shoes on, and keeps going. Now, why do I make this point? The guy winds up in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, which is not the target. So he makes it past more than 50 miles in the 20 hours. And he gets the full distance, and he kind of heeds the call. So what's the point of this? How does this all kind of come together? Well, in my opinion, that is exactly the kind of leadership and doing that we are lacking in a very, very big way in many of our circles, right? In our professional circles, in our societal circles, certainly in society at large. And we still have the problem. There was a recent thing that came out maybe a day or 2 ago. I was tagged on Twitter. Dion Jewell had tagged me on Twitter. And it was about the physical activity guidelines being met. Now, if you don't know anything about the physical activity guidelines, it's essentially 150 minutes of aerobic activity and 2 times strength per week. And if you're doing that, you're meeting guidelines. And the leading state in the country at this point was Colorado, and not to be, no big surprise there. It's a very active state. But think this through for a second. The leading state in the country, about a third of their people are meeting the guidelines, which means that 67% of Americans, in the best case scenario, are failing the minimum standard as far as what we think produces health. That should tell us something. That should really scream something. It says that in 1908, Theodore Roosevelt identified a problem as Marines. In 1960, John F. Kennedy identified the problem in society overall, and here we are now in 2018. We're talking about decades later, and the exact same problem exists, and it's not necessarily getting a tremendous amount better. Now, there is some positive news at the end so far, and that is that it does seem to have improved. We've beaten our goal, and I sort of put this out on Twitter a little bit sarcastically. Like, it's hard not to be frustrated with the fact that we're claiming some improvement, some incremental progress there, because we've beaten the 2020, healthy 2020 or whatever, the goal, which was 20%, which meant that 4 out of 5 failing would be okay as long as 1 out of 5 was passing. And on average, we've beaten that, although not the case in most states. So what does that do? Well, in my opinion, you have, like I said, you have your leaders and you have your doers. And we should all be striving to be doing both, right? And so for me, take us now up to 3 years ago. 3 years ago was like, yeah, this is an unacceptable thing, and I feel like there's just some kind of a call to do something about this. So I started Free the Yoke, and 2 years ago we started the Summer Move. And what we tried to do there was to put population health tactics at a otherwise recalcitrant problem, right? So physical activity is definitely a problem. No one has time for it. Life is busy and sedentary. That's a bad combination. We don't have time to do it, and our environments don't do it. And if you really look at it, you can go and look into guys like Daniel Lieberman at Harvard, and we're talking about this a little bit with our corporate clients this month. He makes a very solid point. We have a biological drive not to move more, right? Like that's, our drive is not to do that. Our drive is to conserve energy. I mean, if you really think about what it means to be fundamentally human, our drives pretty much are feed ourselves, reproduce, and conserve energy so that you can run away from predators or feed yourself again the next day. So the bottom line here is that we don't have this natural drive. It's not natural for us to go out and exercise. In fact, it's natural for us not to. And the only way we're going to do it is when the environment, whether it be the physical environment or the social environment, really kind of nudges us that way, makes us kind of do it, forces our hand a little bit. And so those are the tactics of population health management. Like if you really stop and want to know, that's really what this is all about. Now, there are people doing it. There are people out there getting things done. So one of those people in the business world is a guy by the name of Harris Rosen. And this week, in fact, I think today on the APHPT side, we're going to be releasing an interview that we did with him. He's a big hotel complex owner, and he's kind of taken it upon himself to make healthcare and health of his employees a strategic asset. Right? So in his workplace, he identified health and said, listen, if my employees are healthy, they don't miss work. And if they don't miss work, I'm going to save a boatload of money, right? Like that's a leader. That's a business leader. He's identified a problem and an opportunity, and he's going to go after it. And he does. And so I was fortunate enough to sit with Mark Rubenstein and Aaron Perez, who were able to arrange an interview with this guy. And this guy's not an easy guy to get a hold of, but they took the leadership on their part. Aaron mentioned it to Mark. Mark calls the guy winds up calling back. We wind up getting an interview. That's getting released today, so look for it. But the bottom line is that type of activity of leadership, I've identified a problem and I want to get after it. Okay, that is exactly the kind of thing that we're trying to do when it comes to applied prevention, health promotion, and population health. The difference is that we have to create environments that make it easy to do that. Okay, and to me, that's where we come full circle and talk a little bit about the Summer of Move. Now, so just understand, there's a pretty deep design, and I plan on going over some of this in more detail. So for those of you who are on virtual ICE, you'll get a little bit more of this. I'll kind of pull back the covers a little bit and talk to you a little bit about what it all entails. There's a lot of design to make population health, applied prevention, health promotion happen. And of course, that's what we try to teach in the course, is get you thinking that way so that you can think at a design level, at a systems level. And then from there, you can dive into it in your own communities, or if you're seeking employment with employers who want to do the same strategy. But here's the bottom line. Right, the bottom line is that once you figure it out and you design environments and systems that allow that, you can get the action, the behavior that you want. So if we go back to JFK, I apologize for the shaky hands here. If we go back to JFK, the behavior that he wanted was exercise to improve, American vigor, as he called it. Vigor, right? The soft American. We need more vigor. And he wanted to kind of set this forth as the challenge. The doer, his brother, says, listen, we're going to just go out and get this done and see where we're at. And so that's kind of the same basic concept. Now, how did we do it? Well, we set up a social environment, right? We didn't set up the physical environment. Physical environment can be done. It's a great thing. Walkable communities, advocating for sidewalks. You're going to hear more about that in the coming weeks. I have a meeting today about the next webinar between the APHPT group and APTA. And we're going to be diving into that a little bit. But the thing that you really have to understand is that it's not just the physical environment that drives your behavior. Your social environment will too. So when you build things like teams, when you create challenges, the human brain loves challenges, when you create a reward system, you can start to get the behavior. Now let me just put it into perspective for you, right? We've now been doing this for 3 weeks. Okay, the Summer Move started about 3 weeks ago. And we had about 300 people who signed up, about 200 who have taken it seriously, and maybe, let's call it like maybe 100 who are really kind of engaged. So far in those 3 weeks, 150,000 physical activity minutes have been logged. Okay, so think about that for a second. If you give me 100 people, and over the course of 3 weeks, I can promise you 150,000 movement minutes will be logged. That's a fair amount. That means almost everybody is meeting the physical activity guideline, right? So just pause and think about that. We're claiming victory in many ways, or at least substantial progress toward our goals as a society, because the best state in the country for physical activity is achieving 67% failure. Okay, they're achieving 32% or something like that victory. So we're going to call that like a really good win. I have a hard time with that, because we know that if we apply the right tactics and apply the right design, we can get far better results. Now, it's only 100 people. Granted, I get that. That's a small group. But what I will tell you is, if you find me an employer who has 100 employees, and they can get their employees to do that much exercise activity and improve their vigor and no longer be soft Americans, as John F. Kennedy says, but let's be hard Americans, bottom line is performance improves. That right there is the essence of applied prevention and health promotion. Okay, that is at its essence. It's identify a problem, physical activity. Design a system that rewards the activity that you want, summer of move. Get the result you're looking for, lots of physical activity, which ultimately leads to an outcome which we all want, which is fitter, healthier, stronger, happier people who can do more work. At the end of the day, that's what we're after. So again, just to recap, in my 1 second left, that was my 15 minutes of fame here this morning. Okay, let's recap. First and foremost, this problem was identified in 1908. It's not a new problem. If you can't walk 20 miles or 50 miles in 20 hours, so says Theodore Roosevelt, you're not doing it right if you're a Marine. It was reiterated in 1960, JFK. Was then reiterated again as a challenge in 1963. His brother Bobby Kennedy met the challenge, went out in loafers, and went 50 miles. So let me put the final touches on this, and if you stayed to the end, thank you. Here's the final touches. At the end of the summer, we're going to have some fit people. On October 6th in New Jersey, let's start this way. In September, end of September, in Albuquerque, many of those people are going to get together for the Rising Tide Conference. If you're interested in that, join us there. If you're not, you can't make it there, feel free to come out on October 6th and see if some of us are up to the challenge. October 6th, we have a half marathon in Jersey, the Main Street Half Marathon. Some of my colleagues helped put it on. But what I'm going to do, I haven't told them yet, I'm announcing this for the first time right here, is that I think I'm going to go out before the race, and I'm going to do the first whatever it is that I need to do, 37 miles, so that I can finish up and do the 50-mile challenge that JFK laid down. I feel like if a guy like me can get out there and walk 50 miles in 20 hours and meet the guideline that Roosevelt put out and Kennedy put out, that more people can do it too. I hope that you will think about that as well. Join me if you want. There's plenty of space for tents. Anybody who thinks they're up to the challenge, 50-mile hike, 20 hours or less, October 5th and 6th in New Jersey. Meet me there. Or if nothing else, meet me for some more banter on this in the course starting in September. Have a great day. Remember, it's only Monday. There's a lot left of this week. It's all ahead of us. Make it count.